In South Africa today, a deep and persistent shadow hangs over our hopes for a brighter future. This shadow is corruption, a problem so widespread that many citizens now see it as one of the biggest threats facing our democracy, right alongside the crushing crisis of unemployment. It's not just a matter of a few dodgy deals or some chancers trying their luck. It's a systemic issue that has burrowed its way into the very heart of our government and the state-owned companies that are meant to serve us all. This isn't a victimless crime. It is a deliberate and calculated theft from the pockets of every single South African, robbing us of resources, opportunities, and most damagingly, our trust in the institutions that govern our lives. The problem has become so severe that international watchdogs have taken notice, and our country's reputation has suffered greatly as a result. The scale of this challenge is truly mind-boggling, and it's something we hear about almost every day on the news, in Parliament, and in conversations around the braai. A 2024 survey revealed just how deeply this concern runs, with nearly a third of South Africans naming corruption as the most pressing issue we face. This isn't just an abstract political debate, it's a lived reality. When we talk about corruption, we are talking about the missing medicines in our clinics, the potholes that damage our cars, and the power cuts that plunge our homes and businesses into darkness. It is the reason why the promises of 1994 feel so distant for so many, a betrayal of the dream of a fair and prosperous nation for all who live in it. Understanding corruption is crucial because it helps us connect the dots between the headlines about massive scandals and the everyday struggles we face. It's about powerful people in high places making decisions not for the good of the country, but for their own enrichment and the enrichment of their friends and associates. This web of graft, often referred to as state capture, was designed to systematically loot public funds, turning entities that should be driving our economy into personal piggy banks for a select few. The consequences are devastating, crippling our ability to grow, create jobs, and deliver the basic services that every citizen has a right to expect from their government. Ultimately, this essay aims to unpack this complex and painful subject in a way that is clear and easy to understand. We will look at how this rot set in, which companies were hit the hardest, and what the real-world cost has been, not just in rands and cents, but in the human cost of lost jobs, failing services, and a generation of young people without hope. We will also examine the efforts being made to clean up the mess and hold people accountable, while acknowledging the widespread feeling that justice is moving far too slowly. This is not just a story of loss. It is a story about our collective struggle to reclaim our country from those who have plundered it. To understand the corruption that has plagued South Africa, we need to look at the mechanics of how it actually works, especially within our state-owned enterprises. This wasn't just simple bribery, it was a sophisticated and highly organized system designed to capture the state itself. The process often began with placing compromised or compliant individuals in key positions on the boards and in the management of these massive companies. Once these individuals were in place, they could manipulate procurement processes, ensuring that lucrative contracts were awarded to specific predetermined companies, often at inflated prices. These companies would then pay kickbacks to the officials who facilitated the deals, creating a cycle of looting that drained billions from the public purse. A key tactic was the abuse of procurement rules. State companies like Eskom, Transnet, and others have massive budgets for buying goods and services, from coal and locomotives to IT systems and consulting services. Corrupt networks would rig these tenders by creating specifications that only one favored company could meet, or by disqualifying legitimate bidders on flimsy technicalities. In other cases, contracts were awarded without any competitive bidding at all, under the guise of an emergency. This systematic rigging ensured that politically connected individuals and their business partners could milk these state entities dry, all while delivering substandard goods, or in some cases no goods or services at all. It was a well-oiled machine for personal enrichment at the expense of the nation. The capture wasn't limited to just senior executives, it extended to a network of enablers, including legal firms and consultants, who helped to legitimize the corrupt transactions. As investigations by the Special Investigating Unit have shown, some law firms were instrumental in drafting the very contracts that facilitated the looting, and they too received handsome payments for their role. This created a layer of professional respectability over what was essentially organized crime. the entire ecosystem was geared towards extracting wealth, with little to no regard for the operational health of the SOEs or the impact on the South African public. The primary goal was to get the money out, and the system was built to do just that, efficiently and ruthlessly. This process, which came to be known as state capture, was laid bare in detail by the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. The commission heard harrowing testimony from brave whistleblowers who exposed how board meetings were manipulated, how ministers allegedly gave instructions to executives, and how billions of rands were siphoned off. The reports from this commission painted a grim picture of a state that was, in many parts, working for the benefit of a corrupt few, rather than its citizens. It showed that the problem wasn't just a few bad apples, but a systemic rot that had infected the entire orchard, making it incredibly difficult to root out. Eskom, the state-owned power utility, stands as perhaps the most devastating example of how corruption can bring a country to its knees. For decades, Eskom was a source of national pride, providing reliable and affordable electricity that powered our economy. However, it became the epicenter of state capture, with rampant graft and gross mismanagement leading to its near-total collapse. The corruption at Eskom took many forms, from hugely inflated contracts for coal supply to dodgy deals for the construction of new power stations like Medupi and Kusile. These projects ran billions of rands over budget and years behind schedule, not just due to poor planning, but because they became vehicles for looting on an unprecedented scale. The consequences of this plunder are felt by every South African in the form of load shedding. The record-breaking 335 days of power cuts we endured in 2023 were a direct result of the long-term neglect and systematic stripping of Eskom's resources. The money that should have been spent on maintaining older power stations and properly managing the construction of new ones was instead diverted into the pockets of corrupt officials and their associates. As a result, the power grid became unstable and unreliable, forcing the utility to implement rolling blackouts to prevent a complete national grid collapse. These power cuts have crippled small businesses, disrupted daily life, and cost our economy billions in lost productivity. The Special Investigating Unit has been digging into the rot at Eskom for years, uncovering a web of suspicious contracts and conflicts of interest. Their investigations, which have been ongoing since 2018, are looking into alleged corruption totaling a portion of the over $7 billion being investigated across all state-owned enterprises. The schemes were often brazen, involving politically connected companies being awarded massive contracts for coal, transport, and maintenance at prices far above market rates. This not only drained Eskom's finances but also meant that the utility was often supplied with poor quality coal, which further damaged the power plants and reduced their efficiency, creating a vicious cycle of failure and decline. Despite President Cyril Ramaphosa's promises to clean up the beleaguered utility and hold those responsible to account, many South Africans remain deeply skeptical. The problem at Eskom is not just historical. Reports of ongoing corruption, sabotage, and criminal syndicates operating within the power stations continue to surface. The fight to fix Eskom is therefore not just a technical challenge of repairing infrastructure, it is a battle against entrenched criminal networks that have profited from its demise for years. Until integrity is restored and a culture of accountability is firmly established, the shadow of load shedding will continue to loom over the nation's future. Transnet, the state-owned company responsible for our ports, railways, and pipelines, is the backbone of South Africa's economy. It is supposed to be the engine that moves goods from our mines and farms to the rest of the world. However, just like Eskom, Transnet became a primary target for state capture, with devastating consequences for the country's trade and industry. The Special Investigating Unit is currently investigating a staggering number of suspicious deals at Transnet, with allegations of corruption amounting to over $4 billion. These investigations cover around 60 major contracts and hundreds of instances where officials may have had conflicts of interest, pointing to a deeply embedded culture of graft that prioritized personal gain over national interest. One of the most infamous scandals involved the procurement of 1,064 locomotives. This massive deal was meant to modernize Transnet's aging fleet, but it was manipulated to channel enormous kickbacks to companies linked to the Gupta family and their associates. The price of the locomotives was massively inflated, and the contracts were structured in a way that ensured billions of rands were siphoned out of the country. This single deal crippled Transnet financially and left it with equipment that was, in some cases, not even suitable for our railway lines. The Zondo Commission uncovered extensive evidence of how senior executives and board members colluded to push these deals through, ignoring all warnings and proper governance procedures. The impact of this corruption on the South African economy has been catastrophic. Our mining and agricultural sectors rely heavily on Transnet to get their products to port for export. Because of the mismanagement, corruption, and lack of investment in maintenance, our rail network is in a state of disrepair. This has forced many companies to switch to more expensive and less efficient road transport, clogging our highways and increasing the cost of doing business. Major international mining companies have publicly stated that they have had to scale back production and have lost billions in revenue simply because Transnet could not move their minerals to the ports, a direct blow to our country's GDP and tax revenue. The problems extend to our ports as well, which have become notoriously inefficient, with long waiting times for ships to load and unload cargo. This damages our reputation as a reliable trading partner and makes South African goods less competitive on the global market. The 47 billion rands that the Special Investigating Unit believes was lost to corruption at Transnet is not just a number on a page, it represents lost jobs, lost investment, and lost opportunities for economic growth. Fixing Transnet is therefore not just about recovering stolen money, it is about rebuilding the essential infrastructure that our entire economy depends upon to function and thrive. The Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, or PRASA, was created to provide affordable and reliable public transport for millions of working-class South Africans who depend on trains to get to work and school. Instead, it became another casualty of systemic corruption, leaving commuters stranded and our passenger rail network in ruins. Investigators believe that PRASA lost approximately $540 million to corruption through a variety of schemes. One of the most shocking discoveries was the presence of over 1,200 so-called ghost employees on the agency's payroll. These were non-existent people who were being paid salaries every month, with the money being diverted into the pockets of corrupt officials in a brazen act of fraud. This widespread looting had a direct and devastating impact on the services PRASA was supposed to provide. Money that should have been invested in new trains, upgrading tracks, and securing stations was stolen, leading to a near-total collapse of the passenger rail system in many parts of the country. Train lines were stripped bare by criminals for scrap metal, stations were vandalized beyond recognition, and the trains that did run were often unsafe and unreliable. For millions of South Africans, the failure of PRASA meant longer and more expensive journeys to work using taxis, cutting deep into their already meager incomes and placing a huge strain on families. South African Airways, our national airline, tells a similar story of high-flying ambition brought crashing down to earth by corruption and mismanagement. Once a symbol of national pride connecting South Africa to the world, SAA became financially insolvent after years of being plundered. An SIU report from 2023 uncovered evidence of unlawful procurement deals and dodgy contract negotiations. The report concluded that certain board members had personally benefited from corrupt payments that were facilitated by at least 2 legal firms, showing again how a network of enablers helped to sustain the looting. The airline required billions in government bailouts just to stay afloat, money that could have been spent on schools, hospitals, or social grants. The legacy of corruption at SAA is one of grounded planes, lost jobs, and a tarnished national reputation. The airline had to be placed into business rescue, and has only recently begun to fly again in a much smaller, downscaled form. The story of SAA, like that of PRASA, is a powerful reminder of how corruption doesn't just steal money. It destroys valuable national assets that took decades to build. It undermines our ability to provide essential services, whether it's getting people to work safely on a train, or representing our country proudly in the skies. The cost is measured not only in the billions lost, but in the collapse of institutions that were meant to serve the public good. It is, honestly, difficult to put an exact figure on the total amount of money lost to corruption in South Africa, but the numbers that have emerged from various investigations are truly staggering. The Special Investigating Unit alone is looking into alleged corruption totaling over $7 billion, well over 100 billion rand, across major state-owned companies. This figure includes more than $4 billion at Transnet, and the estimated $540 million plundered from PRASA. When you add the billions lost at Eskom, the National Lotteries Commission and various government departments, the total cost of state capture is estimated by some economists to be as high as 1.5 trillion rand over the last decade. That is a sum so vast it is almost impossible to comprehend. To put that amount into perspective, 1.5 trillion rand is roughly equivalent to a third of South Africa's entire annual economic output. It is more than the government's entire budget for education, health, and social grants combined for a full year. This is not just money that has disappeared from a spreadsheet. It is money that was stolen from every taxpayer in the country. It is the money that should have been used to build new schools and hospitals, provide housing for the poor, maintain our roads and water infrastructure, and create the jobs that our country so desperately needs. The theft of these funds represents one of the greatest betrayals of the South African people in our democratic history. The economic impact of this looting, though, goes far beyond the initial amount stolen. Corruption creates a hostile environment for investment, both local and international. Investors are hesitant to put their money into a country where contracts are not awarded fairly, and where the rule of law appears weak. This has resulted in a loss of foreign direct investment, which is crucial for economic growth and job creation. Furthermore, the collapse of state-owned enterprises like Eskom and Transnet has created massive bottlenecks in our economy, increasing the cost of doing business and making South African products less competitive on the world stage. The financial cost is therefore multiplied through lost growth and missed opportunities. Moreover, the state has been forced to spend hundreds of billions of rand on bailouts for these failing state-owned enterprises, money that comes directly from the public purse. Every bailout for SAA or Eskom is money that cannot be spent on fighting crime, improving education, or supporting the unemployed. In essence, South African taxpayers have been forced to pay twice. First, when the money was stolen by corrupt officials, and second, when their tax money was used to prop up the very institutions that were plundered. This staggering bill is a debt that will burden our country for generations to come, a direct consequence of the greed and impunity that defined the era of state capture. The vast sums of money lost to corruption are not just abstract figures, they have a direct and honestly painful impact on the daily lives of ordinary South Africans, creating a ripple effect that touches every community. The most visible consequence, as we've seen, is the failure of basic services. The rolling blackouts from Eskom are a constant frustration, disrupting work, education, and home life. But the problem runs deeper. Municipalities, also plagued by corruption, often fail to deliver clean water, fix sewerage leaks, or collect refuse, leading to poor sanitation and health risks. The roads are riddled with potholes because the money allocated for maintenance was stolen or misspent. These are not minor inconveniences, they are a fundamental breakdown of the social contract between the state and its citizens. Corruption is also a major driver of unemployment and poverty. When state companies like Transnet fail, the entire economy suffers. Mines have to cut back on production, and farms struggle to get their produce to market, leading to job losses in these crucial sectors. Small businesses, which are the engine of job creation, are hit particularly hard. They simply cannot afford the generators needed to survive load shedding, and they lose business when supply chains are disrupted. A 2022 survey found that 90% of South Africans believed the government had performed poorly in creating jobs, a sentiment directly linked to the economic paralysis caused by corruption. The staggering youth unemployment rate, which reached over 60% in 2024, is a tragic testament to a generation whose opportunities have been stolen. Furthermore, corruption drives up the cost of living for everyone. When contracts are awarded to friends and family at inflated prices, it is the public that ultimately pays the bill. This can happen directly through higher electricity and water tariffs, as failing utilities try to recover their losses. It also happens indirectly, as the increased cost of transport and logistics due to a failing rail system gets passed on to the consumer in the form of higher prices for food and other essential goods. A staggering 93% of South Africans criticized the government's failure to stabilize prices, a clear indication of the financial pressure that households are under. Corruption, therefore, acts as a hidden tax on the poor, making it even harder for families to make ends meet. Beyond the economic and service delivery impacts, corruption erodes the very fabric of our society trust. When people see political leaders and officials enriching themselves with impunity while the rest of the country suffers, it breeds a deep sense of cynicism and despair. It undermines faith in democracy and the rule of law. Why should a citizen obey the law when their leaders so blatantly disregard it? This erosion of trust is perhaps the most dangerous legacy of state capture, as it makes it much harder to mobilize society to solve our collective problems. It creates a nation of us versus them, where the government is no longer seen as a partner in progress, but as an obstacle to it. In the face of such widespread looting, the question on every South African's mind is, what is being done about it, and is it enough? The government has indeed taken some steps to combat corruption. The establishment of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry was a crucial move, as it publicly exposed the depth and breadth of state capture for all to see. The Commission's final report implicated numerous high-ranking government officials and business executives in bribery, fraud, and racketeering, providing a detailed roadmap for law enforcement agencies to follow. President Cyril Ramaphosa has publicly pledged to implement the Commission's recommendations and to lead a campaign to clean up both the government and the ruling party. Following the Commission's work, investigative bodies like the Special Investigating Unit and the National Prosecuting Authority's Investigating Directorate have been hard at work. The SIU has been instrumental in uncovering specific instances of corruption, leading to civil litigation to recover some of the stolen funds and cancel fraudulent contracts. They regularly report to Parliament on their progress in cases involving Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, and other entities. The Investigating Directorate was specifically set up to handle the complex prosecutions arising from the Zondo Commission's findings. There have been some high-profile arrests and court cases which are meant to send a clear signal that the era of impunity is over and that no one is above the law. However, despite these efforts, there is a widespread public perception that progress is far too slow and that very few of the so-called big fish have actually faced real consequences. Many of the individuals who were heavily implicated in the Zondo Commission's reports continue to hold positions of power or enjoy their ill-gotten gains without facing criminal charges. The legal processes are incredibly slow and are often delayed by well-funded legal challenges from the accused. This has led to a deep sense of frustration and skepticism among the public, with many believing that the political will to prosecute powerful, politically connected individuals is simply not there. The feeling is that while the right noises are being made, the system lacks the teeth to deliver true accountability. Anti-corruption experts share some of this pessimism, particularly regarding the prospect of recovering the vast sums of money that were stolen. Much of the loot was moved offshore into complex webs of shell companies, making it extremely difficult and expensive to trace and recover. While the Asset Forfeiture Unit has had some successes in seizing local assets, it is unlikely that South Africa will ever get back the majority of what was lost. The fight against corruption is therefore a long, uphill battle. While important investigative work is being done, the slow pace of prosecutions and the lack of visible consequences for the main architects of state capture mean that, for many South Africans, justice delayed feels very much like justice denied. In conclusion, the story of corruption in South Africa is a painful one, a narrative of immense national potential squandered for the personal enrichment of a few. We have seen how a systematic campaign of state capture targeted our most vital state-owned companies, transforming them from engines of development into sites of plunder. The consequences have been severe, leaving us with a crippled power grid, a dysfunctional railway system, a grounded airline, and a public transport network in tatters. The cost is not just measured in the hundreds of billions of rand that were stolen, but in the daily struggles faced by millions of citizens, the darkness of load shedding, the despair of unemployment, and the strain of the rising cost of living. This is not a problem that belongs only to the past. While the most brazen era of state capture may be behind us, corruption continues to thrive in new and insidious ways at all levels of government. It remains the single greatest obstacle to building the fair, prosperous, and equal society that was promised in 1994. It is the root cause of the service delivery failures that spark protests in our communities, and it is the reason why trust between the people and the state is at an all-time low. As long as this cancer is allowed to fester, our dream of a better life for all will remain just that, a dream, perpetually out of reach. The fight against corruption, therefore, cannot be left to the government and investigators alone. While we must continue to demand more from them, faster prosecutions, harsher sentences, and a genuine commitment to clean governance, we all have a role to play. It requires active citizenship. This means supporting the work of whistleblowers who risk everything to expose the truth. It means holding our elected officials accountable at the ballot box and in our communities. It means rejecting the everyday low-level corruption that we sometimes encounter. From paying a bribe to get a driver's license to ignoring tender irregularities in our local municipalities. A culture of integrity must be built from the ground up. Ultimately, reclaiming our country from the clutches of corruption is a fight for our collective future. It is a fight for every child who deserves a decent education, for every young person who deserves the dignity of a job, for every family that deserves to live in a safe community with reliable services, and for every business that deserves a fair chance to succeed. The path to rebuilding is long and difficult, but it begins with a shared understanding that this is our fight. It is a battle for the soul of our nation, and it is one that we cannot afford to lose. The future of South Africa depends on it.